Not today. Now then, welcome back to the channel and another edition of Barnsley Biker Video Diaries. As you can see from the title and that little bit of an introduction there, yeah, it's still cold and wet here in good old UK, which is typical of our weather at this time of year, which brought me on to still not getting out to ride at all at the moment. There was a moment yesterday where it was cold and dry and good intentions. I was going to try and get the little Yamaha out and take it for a quick spin up the road because it's not had a proper road test yet, and lo and behold, it had got cold feet and refused to start. I think I fixed it. Turned out just to be a kink in the fuel pipe, I think. I'm hoping anyway. So fuel weren't getting into carb basically. So replaced the fuel pipe, had it running eventually, but by then it was getting too late really to justify going out, and I wouldn't be able to get far before it was dropping dark and dropping proper cold. Which sort of brought me around to thinking, as I've got older, I probably am a fair weather biker. Which to some people is a bit of an insult if you're a motorcyclist. But I'm not ashamed to admit it, if I'm being honest. I mean, when I was thinking about this video and what I wanted to talk about, I worked out that I'm not far off from 50 years of riding. And I look back on all those years, and especially in the early days, when I first started riding, a motorcycle was my only or my primary form of transport. Quite often I would have access to a car, but it wouldn't always be available to me, and I passed my test in a car around about the time I did on a bike. But I was still at school when I got my first bike. I can remember that first winter was one of the worst we'd had for a long time, where some of the minor roads around here were blocked with 8-foot, 10-foot snowdrifts. And I can remember riding home from school that Friday when that snow came down. I think the following year was a cold one, and sort of in the late 70s and in 1980 was a very cold one. And all those years I was riding. And to be fair, didn't think there was anything wrong with it. And there isn't really, but you just got on and did it, because if you had to get somewhere, you had to get on your bike and you had to go. One thing it did teach me is that here in the UK, because we use a lot of salt on the roads, and because our winters are wet and cold rather than dry and cold, if you ride your bike through winter, the salt is going to destroy it. And I mean destroy it. And I found out the hard way. My first, if you like, big bike, a couple of winters, and I was stripping it down to completely repaint the frame, repaint the swinging arm, change the swinging arm bearings. Everything had got, the salt had got in, and once the salt gets in, it becomes a nightmare to try and stop that corrosion. So you learn quickly. But back in those days, it was quite common amongst my motorcycling friends for us to have what we used to call a winter bike, which would be an old hack. A lot of people preferred the Honda 90 because of its leg shields and lightweight. Back in those days, you could pick them up dirt cheap, you know, and when you're needing transport to get to work, a Honda 90 makes sense. Others had little 125s or mopeds or whatever. I had 3, I think, in a row, or well, say 3 in a row, 2 in a row, but and a third that somebody sold me for spares. MZ 125 150s, cracking little bike, ideal for riding when you don't need to worry about the damage that the environment might be doing to it, shall we say. So I did several winters riding around on an MZ. And then, like a lot of people, obviously, I say you get married, settle down, start a family, a car becomes more part of your life. But even then, yeah, I was married, I'd got young children. The car was primarily my wife's form of transport, available if I needed it. I was still riding bikes. I got a job in the motorcycle trade around about this time. Was fortunate enough at that time, I was working for quite a large company, as far as they had several car showrooms and a couple of motorcycle showrooms. They grew on both sides of the business while I was there, and you probably picked up on that in some of my other videos. But the policy was for car salesmen to have a company car, usually a demonstrator of some sort. We were treated in the same way as motorcycle salesmen, as far as the techniques we used, the training, etc. And it was thought appropriate that if the car guys got a car, then we should get a motorcycle as company transport. So for 3-4 years, I was fortunate enough to have a series of motorcycles registered as demonstrators, and if a customer really wanted a ride, we'd arrange it. But generally speaking, it was our transport for 6 months of the year. Company policy was they put it on the road around about April and took it off the road in September, or if you'd done more than 3,000 miles or it needed new tyres, then they'd take it off you. But when they took it off us, we then were allowed to ride anything that we took in part exchange that had road tax and an MOT. So again, I was still riding to work in the winters back then, generally speaking, on just anything that had come in that probably wasn't going to go for resale because they didn't want it destroying with the winters again. And had a variety of machines, Z750. I can remember at one point I had a Suzuki, I think it was a 450 Custom. Just about anything that came in, we got to use, as long as it got road tax on and an MOT. But then, for various reasons, the company had a bit of a change in policy, and we were given company cars. So I went from having a GSXR 750 Slabby 1 year to a Ford 950 Pop Fiesta the year after. Yeah, you can understand how excited we got about that. But we still had access to bikes, and I got to ride lots of demonstrators, go on lots of product launch days. So I was still riding regularly, and I also had my own bike in the garage as well. I think I can count on one hand the number of years that there's not been a bike in my garage. So I had several projects while I was working at Carnell's back in the days, and on nice warm summer days, it wasn't a problem for me to come into work on the bike. I used to love going into work when I'm my 1200 Bandit. If I went to work in the car, because of traffic, etc., the commute could take anything up to an hour 15 regularly, and sometimes 2 hours just because of trunk congestion. If I went on my bike, less than half an hour. So I preferred my bike. But even back in those days, do you know what? When the weather started to turn cold and start to turn wet, I'd think twice about using the bike. Hated getting it dirty. Hated getting it in the salt. I avoided that like the plague, and still do today. And as we get older, to a degree, the reason we ride bikes changes. And now I ride motorcycles because it's my hobby. It's my leisure pursuit, it's my pastime, it's my escape, time to be alone, time for that meditative moment, to lose myself in just the experience of riding. But I do find on a day like today, I have no motivation to want to ride. I get no masochistic pleasure from being wet and cold. And so it has reached a point where, yeah, I'll arrange to go for rides with friends, and we will check the weather forecast. And, I have an app on my phone which allows me to track any rainfall, and from that you can track which way it's going. And if we've got a ride planned and I check the weather and it looks like whichever way we're going to go, we're going to get wet. And if we're going to get wet and cold even more so, I'll be on the phone and saying, guys, let's knock it on the head. I'm retired. You know, if I don't ride today, then I can ride tomorrow. I appreciate those guys that are still working, that get, some of you still get weekends off. A lot of jobs these days, you'll get a day off somewhere in the week or whatever. And I appreciate that that limits the number of days, the amount of time that you've got to get out and ride. And if it's raining, you know what, maybe you'll still take the risk. Having said that, I mean, I've got the gear. Over the last couple of years, I've invested in some thermal layers, some very good ones to be fair. I've invested, this is quite a waterproof jacket. I've got another one more like an enduro style jacket, which has got a zip out liner and is supposed to be waterproof, and has been so far. This has been very waterproof. This has got a sort of Gore-Tex lining, so despite being waxed cotton, because I've got a couple of waxed cotton jackets that don't keep the water out for long, but this one, the lining will keep the water out, and I've been caught in a couple of downpours with this jacket on, and it's worked perfectly well. So yeah, if I'm out on a ride and we get caught in the rain, shrug the shoulders, yeah, que sera. But if I wake up and it's throwing it down, or it's looking like we're going to get caught in rain, whichever way we go, do you know what? I've got jobs I can do in the garage, or I can crawl back into bed and have another hour in bed. I don't mind the cold as much as the rain. Yesterday, yeah, it was barely above freezing, but there was a dry road. I've got the gear, and I wasn't going to be going far. So yeah, if the roads are dry and it's not looking like rain, then I'll get out there. But I mean, we come back to the positive benefits of riding a motorcycle for your mental health, and the fact that you're focused on what you're doing, but what you're doing is muscle memory, second nature. So you're concentrating on what you're doing, but that concentration is an automatic concentration almost. It's intuitive, and you're lost in yourself. You're able to lose yourself in yourself while you're riding. When you're riding in the rain, the level of concentration has to go up exponentially. You know, again, car drivers don't understand the sense of freedom that a motorcycle gives you, that they probably don't understand the extra danger or anxiety that riding, especially when it's really wet, when it's absolutely throwing it down, that gives you. You know, we don't have windscreen wipers. We're constantly having to wipe the rain off our visors, constantly having to make sure our visors are not steaming up from the inside. You know, you're aware that every input into the motorcycle, acceleration, braking, cornering, has to be done that much more carefully, that much more slowly, and it no longer is as relaxing as a summer's day or a dry day. So for that reason, you're not getting the same pleasure, the same enjoyment. And I'm not knocking anybody that does ride all year round, and I know there are people out there that don't mind riding in the rain. And one thing I will say is, modern tyres, if you're like me, you were riding 40, 50 years ago, literally, yes, we had to ride, but in the rain, the tyres back then were absolutely rubbish compared with today. Literally, you weren't leaning the bike over on corners. You were going around them gingerly. You were much more careful on your acceleration. Number of sideways moments I've had on my bikes back then. Whereas modern tyres, you know, all brands probably, but some are better than others. But modern tyres, literally, you can ride in the wet almost with the same confidence as you do in the dry these days. So the equipment, and again, you've got traction control, you've got ABS, so the bike's helping you as well, but you still don't get the pleasure. I see no fun in being wet and cold, you know. And I can remember I've been, over the years, I've been on rides where I've come back and I've been so wet, I've literally had to strip off in the kitchen to get out of my clothes so they can go straight in the washing machine because they've been absolutely wringing wet. I've been on rides where I've come back so cold that I had to run a bath just to get the feeling back into all my extremities and get myself, you know, on the point of hypothermia. So I've been there, I've done that, and yeah, I can understand those that like it. I can understand those that need to do it. But I'm afraid, I'm sorry to say that these days I don't need to do it. I ride for fun, and so I'm going to wait until the weather warms up or at least dries up a little bit. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting out there. I'm looking forward to doing, I've got a few ideas for riding videos. I need to do a video with the Yamaha that's now all been put back together, and hopefully is working all right. So I need to do a shakedown run on that, which I'll try and share with you. Yeah, the Triumph, I've done a couple of bits and pieces. I've put the handguards on, a little bit of a screen. Not going to make a lot of difference to the ride, I'm guessing, but just looking forward to getting out on that as well, and getting out and riding again. I think we're all itching a little bit, but as you saw at the beginning, opening the garage door at the moment, it's barely above freezing out there now. It's lashing down with rain, and there's a bit of a not as a strong wind as we've had over recent days, but the wind's blowing, and that's no fun. So I'm going to bin it off for now. Hopefully a few weeks time it's going to start warming up, it's going to start drying up, and we'll get out there. But until then, thanks for watching. Please share. Please get your mates to subscribe. And remember, I am the Barnsley biker, and I'll see you.